Good morning, everyone. I'm Petra Mortimer with Generations Health Education. Thank you so much for joining us for our program. Now's the time to get beyond burnout. What to do when you're barely hanging on as a caregiver, presented by Jennifer FitzPatrick. We are so grateful to have Covenant Living sponsoring today's program. Before we start, there are a few things I want to go over with you. Everyone is muted to eliminate any background noise. However, this is an interactive program, so please feel free to ask any questions, answer questions, or comment on the discussion that is taking place. To do this, you can utilize the chat feature, or you will have the ability to unmute yourself. If you do so, please make sure you mute yourself after. As a reminder, to find the chat, you can scroll over the bottom of your screen and there you'll see a banner that pops up. On the banner, there's a bubble that says chat. When you click on that, the chat feature will launch and will most likely show up on the right-hand side of your screen. When you use chat, your questions, comments, or answers will only be seen by our sponsors, our presenter, and myself. This is simply for privacy reasons. Again, we encourage your participation, so please use the chat feature. Jennifer is great about keeping an eye on the chat to answer your questions. We also have several polls today. They're anonymous, but we do encourage you to click on those once they pop up. Okay, well, let's get started by showing you a short video about Covenant Living.
Hello, I'm Jay Hibbard, Senior Vice President at Covenant Living Communities and Services, and we're pleased to be able to sponsor this event for you. Did you know that more than 40 million adult children provide some form of care for their aging parents? Well, today's speaker, Jennifer FitzPatrick, a former psychotherapist and gerontologist, will talk to us about how the right environments and meaningful connections have the power to change lives. With Covenant Living being one of the nation's largest not-for-profit senior living providers, our mission drives us every day to provide communities that provide a place for aging parents and loved ones to grow and engage in ways that promote purpose and joy. Today's presentation is something that many of you can relate to. You're caring for your own families while also providing a helping hand and care for your aging parents or loved ones. You know, a move to a senior living community can alleviate this stress, provide newfound freedoms, and restore healthy relationships. We would love to have you visit one of our communities and experience firsthand how you can find peace of mind for yourself and your loved ones with compassionate care from Covenant Living, a name you can trust. Now, on behalf of all of us at Covenant Living, please welcome Jennifer FitzPatrick for today's presentation.
It has been a really stressful last couple of years, really a lot. I was talking to some of the participants before we formally started, and when you're caregiving, everything is stressful. But the pandemic added a new dimension of stress to all of our lives. And so what I want you to do is we're going to do some exercises during this program. And I mentioned a little bit earlier during the riffing part of the presentation was if you would be kind enough to grab yourself a piece of paper and a pen or open up a Word document if you're on your computer, so we can do a couple of exercises and you can take some notes about what you're going to do to get beyond burnout if you do feel like you're experiencing burnout, and at least if you're not experiencing burnout, to be able to reduce your stress. So what I'd like you to do first, and if you can write into the chat section, that would be terrific. We'd love to hear from you. Is I want to invite you to, before the pandemic or right around the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, Your stress level prior, just prior, where would you put it? Would you put your stress level 0, being, well, you're probably on some really powerful drugs if you're really at 0, or you are at 100. So you're probably not at 0, but are you somewhere in between? Are you 100? Are you saying, Jennifer, there's no way I'm at 100. I'm above 100. I'm probably at 150. My stress level is tough right now, or back then in March of 2020. So Hillary's saying 95. So right before the pandemic, where would you put your stress level? 95. I got 95. I got a 50. I got a 20. Okay. A 10. Okay, great. 10. That's nice. That's where we want people to be. That 10. That's terrific. 50, 60. Great. Okay. Wonderful. So what I want to invite everybody to do who's saying those low numbers, the 10s especially, were you caregiving around that time? And if you were, what were you doing that kept your stress level at a 10 before the pandemic started? And so people are saying, no, you weren't caregiving then. Okay. So all right, I appreciate that. So, but the pandemic occurs, and probably, especially Lynn is sharing, she was not caregiving back then. Her stress level was at a 10. I would probably say, not being a caregiver myself at the moment, my stress level was maybe a 50. I had a lot going on with work, lots of travel, a lot of busy stuff, but certainly wasn't as low as 10. But I'm guessing Lynn and Lauer, you're here and you're saying that you really had a pretty low stress level. You weren't caregiving. But even if you were caregiving, the pandemic coming in has definitely made an impact, I'm guessing. So Hillary's saying she had a very high number. I think you had 95, Hillary. I was already caregiving 6 years for my mom with dementia. It was already impossible to breathe before the pandemic. I'm not going to try to pronounce your name. There was somebody that just wrote in, I was living, I don't want to mess up your name. Is it? I'm going to just say NP. Was living in Hawaii, but moved to Chicago because of your mom. Okay. So needless to say, everybody got more stressed out because of the pandemic. And of course, we heard social distancing for the very first time. I've been in healthcare for 30 years. I have never in my life heard that term. What the heck is social distancing? We're supposed to stay away from people. We as human beings are social creatures. We want to be around other people. Even introverts need other people. So being away, being told if you touch your groceries, you might get COVID and die, being told maybe you need to wear a mask, maybe you don't, maybe you do. And that went all over the place. The guidance was all over the place. I know people who are still washing their groceries and still really, really stressing about worrying about COVID, even though they've had vaccinations, even though they've had boosters. So our world turned upside down. The whole world turned upside down. And so wherever your stress level was before the pandemic, the odds are very strong that your stress level went up probably pretty significantly. And that is a recipe for burnout. Burnout, what is it? It is a state of being exhausted physically, emotionally, mentally. Anybody's at risk for burnout, but especially somebody who is a family caregiver. In the beginning, before we officially started the program, some people were sharing their caregiving experiences. We have one individual on here taking care of 2 parents in their 90s, as well as a sibling who has some disabilities. So definitely, especially with the pandemic, a recipe for a burnout situation. Cousin of burnout is compassion fatigue. And most people probably have heard the term burnout, and people throw around the term burnout a lot. Healthcare providers, we've talked a lot about them being burnout during the last couple of years. Grocery store workers who are getting yelled at because there wasn't toilet paper. Lots and lots of people have experienced burnout, but especially that family caregiver. But compassion fatigue is a little bit different. Compassion fatigue is something that probably most people aren't totally familiar with, but it is the a feeling that you're withdrawing from somebody that's sick or traumatized, and even can lead to feeling apathetic or indifferent to your loved one. That's a tough thing to experience. Burnout, we all get exhaustion. And some people wrote in that, Hillary, I think, wrote in that she couldn't breathe even before all the pandemic stuff happened. But that's something that a lot of people feel like they can admit. Compassion fatigue feels really, really tough because indifference, that you just don't care about your mom, you don't care about your dad or your grandfather or your uncle, whoever it is that you're taking care of. No one wants to admit that. No one wants to feel that. I think feeling it just feels so foreign because if you are a family caregiver, you're probably a pretty empathic person, and experiencing compassion fatigue doesn't feel good. And it also feels really, really lousy to admit and to talk about. But that's why we're here today. You are among friends, you are among people who have been there, who are going through similar experience to what you're going through. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask Petra to pull up a poll. And I want everybody to feel comfortable. This is completely anonymous. And I want you to click on which option feels right to you. In the last 3 months, have you experienced burnout, compassion fatigue, or both? If you're one of the people, which I doubt there's very many, but if you're somebody that says, I haven't experienced burnout, haven't experienced compassion fatigue, neither, just write that in the chat section because I want to hear your secrets. But if you experienced any of the others, burnout, compassion fatigue, or both, please click on one. Wow. Okay. Jen's saying neither yet because our situation is relatively new. Jen, I'm so proud of you for being here today because a lot of people do not come to stuff like this until they are in crisis. So Jen, I'm really happy for you. Jen, in the few minutes before the session began, Jen shared with us that she's taking care of somebody who has had a stroke and they're very, very angry. Jen, I know I started to answer your question a little bit. Spreading out, making sure you're not doing everything, again, is one way to deal with that anger, because you're going to have more patience in dealing with your loved one's anger if there's more of you dealing and helping your loved one. But we're going to talk about the benefits of some other strategies too as we go on. 26% of you said burned out in the last 3 months. 5% of you said compassion fatigue, and almost 70% of you said both. I really appreciate you being vulnerable. I really appreciate you sharing. This is the place to do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to get you to a better place. You got your paper, got your pencil or your Word document open. What I want to ask you to do is write down notes, write down what sounds like a good solution, what's going to help you move past this challenge, these compassion fatigue feelings, these burnout feelings. You're the only one that can do it. I can give you ideas today. I can give you tools, but you're the only one that can implement it so you feel less burnout and compassion fatigue. And people like Jen, if you're saying, no, our situation's new, I'm not there yet, you can prevent it from happening to you. So of course, this has been a recipe. Being a caregiver, just being a caregiver by itself is a recipe for compassion fatigue and burnout. It's exhausting. Taking care of somebody else's needs, especially another adult. We all know being a parent is tough. Being a parent is exhausting, but that little individual is going to get bigger and stronger and grow up, and they're going to be eventually able to do more for himself or herself. But somebody who we're caring for, who we are providing care for, more than likely, it's going to become that that person has more needs, not less needs, unless it's something short term. Maybe somebody's recovering from a hip replacement surgery or something like that. Your life was completely upended by the pandemic. Everybody's was. We can all relate to that, but being a caregiver, having to deal with the stress of what are the rules? What is my state saying now? Should I travel? Do I have to wear a mask? Is my mom going to be safe if she leaves the house? A lot of people really struggled with what do they do about homeschooling and their caregiving if their child is at home, depending on what state you reside in. or your job. Maybe there's 4 of you in the house, 2 kids and 2 adults fighting for internet every day. I mean, there was a lot. Plus, you have to worry about mom. Also, what accompanied the pandemic that I don't think we talk about enough is the difficult feelings. Some people were terrified. Some people still are terrified, even if they've been vaccinated, even if they've been boosted. They are sure that they get COVID, they're going to die. And still, the mortality rate from COVID is still pretty low. That we shouldn't take it seriously, but people, a lot of people are still just very, very anxious. And we're, especially early on when the messaging was like, stay away from other people, don't go out of your house. Other people have been angry about a lot of the things that have happened. I don't want to put a mask on my child. I'm angry about that. I'm angry that my child's school is closing down. I'm an essential worker. Still, other people are very sad. I feel sad. I feel sad because I miss my mom. I haven't felt comfortable visiting her, and I'm really sad. I'm really feeling very guilty because I haven't spent time with her, but I've been told it's not safe. So every single person has had some kind of difficult feelings. Some people have lost their jobs. Some people are upset by the way the government or the public officials have handled different things as far as the pandemic goes. So you add caregiving, your life changing, having difficult feelings about the pandemic and your life changing, and then you put in conflict. Conflicting with somebody in your life, whether it's your kid's school, which so many people had conflicts with, Board of Education meetings, whether it's your job, hey, I want to still work from home, even though all these restrictions have been lifted. Conflict, maybe you and your siblings completely look at the pandemic in a very different way. Or you look at the pandemic in a very different way. And you also look at caregiving for mom in a very different way. So you've had conflict with your siblings. So all of that has made everybody on this program ripe for being, so you have to know that this is normal. What you have experienced and what you're going through is really normal. So we're going to do everything we can today to get you much more reduced stress. So what we're going to do now is a exercise from my book, Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One. It's an exercise, and I'm going to turn off my screen for a little bit. And Petra is actually going to pull up the slides. So we have 4 slides. What we're going to do is there's going to be 4 slides that Petra is going to pull up, and there's going to be feelings, words that are either terms or words that describe feelings. And what I would like to invite you to do on your piece of paper and pen or on your Word document is I'd really like to invite you to write down all the words that you have felt in the last week or month or so. You decide what makes sense for you, okay? You decide, week, month, 2 weeks, it could be 3 months. You decide what makes sense. But I want you to write down every word that you can relate to. This is an exercise called the Caregiver Feelings exercise that's in Cruising Through Caregiving. If you want to download this exercise and all the others for free, go to cruisingthroughcaregiving.com. And Petra, if you could write that in the chat section, that would be terrific. Okay, so we have distressed. I want you to write every word that resonates for you right now. Distressed, emotional, bitter, enraged, burned out, delighted, glum, deserving. So you're very, very welcome to write in the chat section, but this is just for you right now. If you want to just write it on your piece of paper and pencil. Delighted, glum, deserving, competent, appreciative, special, hopeful, proud, sad, safe, under pressure, important, hopeless, worthy, wise, moral, inept, controlled, positive. So I'm going to leave this slide up for just a moment. Just write down every word or term that you identify with. Okay, we're going to pull up the next slide. Effective, rewarded, composed, blessed, lost, joyful, heartbroken, adrift, appreciated, mad, refreshed, thankful, disoriented, in control, confused, worried, furious, satisfied, upset, honored, dejected, loved, valued, grateful, guilty, disappointed, disgruntled, nervous. So we're going to leave this up for another moment. We're going to go to the next slide, Petra. Unappreciated, successful, low, happy, stressed, fulfilled, deserted, respected, manipulated, confident, displeased, mistreated, short-tempered, calm, comforted, helpful, frazzled, accepting, edgy, sleep deprived, reassured, harassed, prepared, determined. Next slide. Angry, cheerful, loving, alone, tired, disgusted, lonely, comfortable, genuine, irritated, resentful, annoyed, abandoned, motivated, resilient, peaceful, worn out, useless, betrayed, glad, pleased, relieved, useful, tearful. Leave that up for just a moment. And then what we're going to do is go through the slides one more time, Petra, if you would. Leave. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Great. So if you want to write in the chat section, I believe we have one person who wrote into the chat section that Midgie wrote in, really identified with unmotivated. But I would like to invite you to add up all the words that you identified with. And what I'd like to ask you to do is identify how many words you believe are positive words or terms, and how many that you believe are negative words or terms. So if you would give us your score, so if there's a specific word or term you want to say, this really resonated with me, write that in the chat section. We'd love to hear it. But we also really would appreciate if you wrote in how many positive words and how many negative words. This is a very telling exercise. Okay, Georgina, thank you. 17 negative, 2 positive. 14 negative, Becky. 8 positive, 20 negative, NP. Lynn, 17 negative, 4 positive. 10 and 10 for Jen. Okay. 5 positive, 14 negative, Jan. 33 negative, 1 positive, 9 negative, 3 positive. This exercise is about taking a look at where you are emotionally right now. And so if you're like Jen who's taking care of a loved one who experienced a stroke, you're sort of right balanced. You've got you got some negative, you got some positive, but they're equal. Jen she talked about that she has been not engaged in a lot of burnout before because she's just starting in the journey of being a caregiver. So what we want for Jen is for her positive words to move up and the negative to go down. And that way she is going to be able to prevent burnout and prevent compassion fatigue. And Jen, that's your goal for today. For everybody else who wrote in, having a lot more negative than positive, you have to take action because it will get worse. And you're the only one that can do it. You have to change something about what you are doing with your caregiving strategy. You have to, otherwise it will continue to get worse. Now we've got one person wrote in 9 positive and 3 negative. So you're coming up as Zoom user. We don't have a name for you, but Zoom user. If you would, I'd love to hear, what are you doing? That's what we want. You can achieve that 9 positive, 3 negative. We want to know what you're doing, Zoom user. What are you doing that your stress level is not as bad, that you have a lot more positives than negatives? That's pretty significant. 9 positive to 3 negative. Zoom user, tell us what you're doing. We want to know your secret. What usually is said is that they recently have, I'm going to see if Zoom user writes in, but that maybe they're could be very early on in the caregiving journey. Things aren't so bad. Maybe they have a lot of people in their friend and family network helping with the care. But a lot of times it's that they made a dramatic change, maybe moving their loved one to senior living, maybe bringing a little bit of help into the home, but maybe joining a support group, maybe getting psychotherapy, maybe asking for more help. Oh, Rose wrote 9 negative, 3 positive. Okay. Zoom user, we don't know what your secret is, but I'm going to guess that it's one or more of those, that they took action to attempt to make their caregiving experience less stressful. You're the only one that can do it. So we're going to take a step away from your feelings right now. Zoom user says withdrawing, and hang on a second. Oh, this is a long answer. Hang on one moment. I just want to see what Zoom user said. And Zoom, I'm having a hard time seeing this. Give me one moment. If I could. Okay. Yeah. Hillary says 80% negative. I can't keep going like this. Okay. All right, Hillary, I'm going to respond to you in just a moment. Yeah. Nancy says her husband, they live at Covenant Living in Keene. Husband has help from OT and PT. Okay, but I'm trying to get back to Zoom users. Meditating and withdraw. And I'm curious what you mean by withdraw. Okay, so Hillary, you asked what would help me. Family stepping in, nobody's apologizing, nobody's recognizing you. Okay, let's talk about that for a minute. So actually, Hillary, I think it's Hillary that just wrote in this long one. Hillary, before I answer or respond to you, I want to do the next poll. So Petra, if you would pull up the next poll, that would be great, because it relates to what you're going through. Have you had a significant conflict with somebody you love in the last year? This might be over caregiving, that you and your siblings are not on the same page with caregiving, like Hillary's going through. It could be that you're not on the same page with the pandemic over the last year, that you view it differently from somebody that you care about. It could be that you and your spouse are having marital problems from all of the stress of the last couple of years, or maybe there were problems before that, and then it became exacerbated during the pandemic. It could be that you're fighting with your kid a lot because of their grades, but any kind of, maybe you're fighting or arguing or conflicting with the person that you're taking care of. So have you had any kind of significant conflict with somebody you love in the last year? Give it a moment, Petra, to write in. Yeah, Hillary, you're not monopolizing. We are going to talk about your situation though, because it is a good case example. You're exactly right. 80% of you said had a significant conflict with somebody you love. Yeah, which makes all of what we're talking about even tougher, even if it had nothing to do with caregiving. But obviously, Hillary shared an example about family not being helpful. So I want to talk about that just for a moment. You can't keep going like this, Hillary says. Family stepping in and being on a team with me. But it sounds like, Hillary, that you did bring your parent to a senior living, your mom. You brought your mom to senior living, and now you're managing a sinking ship. Can you elaborate a little bit about that? What do you mean by you're managing a sinking ship? A lot of times people feel better when they've moved their loved one to senior living. What do you mean by you're managing a sinking ship? Okay, so while we're waiting for Hillary to write in, I am going to ask everybody to say, what is their stress level today? We talked about pre-pandemic, before the world turned upside down, but what do you feel you would put your stress level at today? Is it 0 or is it 100? Jen saying 75, and that's interesting, Jen, because you were really low before the pandemic. 99, we have a 25. Jan, if you want to tell us your secret, we want to hear it. NP says 80, Mitchie says 50. Hillary, we do want to hear your response. If you're able to write that in, just to give us a little bit of insight. Okay, Hillary says, yeah, so Jen's mom's stroke was after the pandemic. Okay, so the feeling better was the goal. All the nurses left the assisted living where your loved one is, where your mom is. Hang on, I just want to scroll down a little bit and try to, it's a little bit hard to keep up with this chat in real time. Okay, so you moved your mom to a senior living community, Hillary, and you don't feel there's new staff and you don't feel like every task is done the way that you want, but you're not being picky. So it's new. Did you just move your mom to senior living, Hillary? When somebody's new moving to senior living, it takes time. For a lot of people, there is a big adjustment period. So while things will get better temporarily, they can be a lot more stressful for a period of time. So I'm curious how new it is. Wait, okay, every week I'm starting over. The 90-day care plan was pushed to 6 months. Omicron, then norovirus. Yeah, okay. Hillary, by chance, are you at a covenant living? Because if you are, there are some fabulous people. Okay, you're not at a covenant living. Maybe you look at a covenant living if it's not what you want where you are. But what I would say is that, honestly, if you want to email me privately, I can get into a little bit. I hear you about the frustration that you're having. It could be that this community is not the right fit. That could be, but only you really can assess that. If you want to email me privately, I'm glad to give you a couple pointers about that, and feel free to do that. You're gonna take mom out and look at another one. Yeah, it's geographically close. I got to tell you though, sometimes the geographically closest option is not always the best option. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. You want to be really mindful. I know being a mile away is very tempting, but you want to make sure it's the best fit for your mom and for you, and it's the right staffing and all that good stuff. But what I want to look at now is I want everybody to be really thinking about, where are you today and where do you want to be? So if you're one of those people that's got a really high number, I want to reiterate, you are the only one that can reduce that number. You're the only one that can reduce that number. So let's talk about, how do you do it? How do you do it? And there's a lot that you can do, but you have to be willing to change the steps. You have to be willing to shake things up and do something differently. Let me give you an example. Has anybody here ever needed to lose weight? and or maybe you wanted to run a marathon, or maybe you wanted your marriage to be better. And if you stick with the status quo, it's never going to happen. It's just never going to happen. You want to get a degree, whatever it is that you have as a goal. If you don't change something about what you're doing, it's unlikely to happen. And sometimes it's simply your attitude. Sometimes it's even just psychological. It's your attitude. But if you don't change something, you will continue down the same path. And so what can you change? So listen, I want you to be thinking about, what do you want your new normal to be like? Everyone's sick of hearing, just like we were sick of hearing social distancing and an abundance of caution. No one really, everybody's like, I'm tired of hearing this new normal business. But you do need to think about your new normal as a family caregiver. What do you want your life to look like? Have you stopped doing things that give you joy? Golfing, reading, getting a good night's sleep, things that you need to keep yourself happy. You have to think, what do you want back in your life that has been removed from your life? Is it sleep? Is it spending time with your kids? Is it being able to go to your kids' soccer games? What do you want back in your life? So as far as self-care goes, I'm not saying self-care is not just check yourself into a spa for a week and then everything's great. If you want to do that and you can do that, I applaud it, but that's not what I mean. That's not necessarily what is the appropriate thing to do. You don't necessarily have to check yourself into a spa. I'm talking about, are you going to carve out an hour a week to do yoga? Are you going to carve out 15 minutes a night to take a bath? What are you going to do that is for you? It is not for your parent or your person that you're caring for. It is not for your spouse, your partner, your kids. It's not for your job. It is for you. What are you going to do? And I'm going to say it's a slippery slope, because when you're in a caregiving situation, especially a long-term caregiving situation, you are dealing with a lot of unknowns. You don't know how long it's going to last. And so a lot of times people think, well, it'll get better. Listen, if it's a hip replacement, yep, you know it's going to be X amount of weeks or months until my loved one is back on track, back to normal. And you can put things on hold. You can put your sleep on hold. You can put eating right on hold. Maybe you're having Doritos for dinner, not the best decision, but if it's a few weeks, few months, okay. But if it's long-term, which so many of you are dealing with long-term situations, you have to take ownership. You have to take a step back and say, what am I going to change here? When my grandmother was one of my best friends. We were very, very close. And when she was younger, when she was in her 60s, she fell forward and she actually broke her shoulders, and she needed to be immobilized, both of her shoulders, immobilized for 4 weeks. Arms, hands, shoulders, elbows, fingers, couldn't use any of them. Think about all that you need those appendages for, a lot of stuff. So for those 4 weeks, I was in my 20s. My grandmother was very young when she became a grandmother. I was in my 20s, and my 3 aunts and I said, we will be your arms, your elbows, your shoulders for the next 4 weeks. And so we took shifts, and one of us was with her every minute of the day for 4 weeks. And my grandfather was there, but he ran errands. Like, my grandmother didn't want him helping in the bathroom or anything like that. And we got through it. It was exhausting, but we got through it because we knew that there was an end date. There was an end date. We could do it. And if you don't have an end date, like, okay, this surgery or this recovery, this is how long it's going to get better. If you don't know about that, you have to put self-care first. You can suspend self-care sometimes in a short-term caregiving situation, but you will suffer, and your loved one's care suffers if you're not caring for yourself. You will have a delayed impact sometimes. You're not necessarily always going to feel it as soon as you start neglecting yourself, but eventually you will. What do? Acknowledge what favorite coping mechanisms you've lost because of everything that's been going on. Maybe you were a runner and you've stopped running. Maybe you were somebody that did happy hour with a bunch of your high school friends every week. Maybe you're somebody who absolutely loved coaching your kids' football team. If you've stopped doing that, you got to figure out a way to bring it back into your life. But you also have to decide what you're going to say no to. What are you going to say no to? You have to have boundaries. You have to have boundaries. You are not supposed to be the answer for everything. You might feel like that sometimes, that you're supposed to be the answer for everything, but you're not. There are a lot of other people, places, and services that can help you. If your loved one has dementia, have you looked into programs from the Alzheimer's Association? If you are finding that your loved one is dealing with depression, have you looked into potentially a therapist for that person, or maybe even just telehealth therapy session? You're not supposed to be somebody's nurse, social worker, psychotherapist, nursing assistant, recreation specialist. You're just not. And so if you find yourself in all of those roles, you've got to start saying to yourself, what am I not going to do anymore? Are you establishing boundaries early and often? When fast forward 20 plus years, my grandmother, when she was in her 80s, she had a lot of chronic illnesses. And when she got really sick, she was very fortunate. My family had, I think, about 12 of us were participating in her care. And it got to the point where she wanted somebody to sleep at her place every night of the week. And she was afraid she was going to fall. And she had no cognitive impairment, but she was forgetting her medicine sometimes because she was on so many different ones, taking them at the wrong time. She was really struggling with walking around. She was struggling with making meals. And so for several months, everybody in our family, we pitched in, and it finally got to a point one night. My dad had spent the night over there. We all were taking turns sleeping over at my grandmother's. My dad called me up really early in the morning, and he says, Jennifer. I said, yes. And he says, I don't want to sleep there anymore. And he sounded like a petulant child the way he said it. And I said, Dad, you don't have to. And he sort of calmed down. I said, you're setting a boundary, and you're allowed to set a boundary. Everybody in this family needs to start setting boundaries. We're not abandoning her. We're not saying, oh, go fend for yourself, Grandma. No, that's not what we were doing. But when we had a conversation with everybody, my aunts, my cousins, my siblings, everybody started saying different versions of a boundary. One of my aunts said, I can't be late to work anymore. I just can't keep, or I can't keep calling out to work if I've been in the hospital with her all night. So we came up with that it was time for senior living. And it was a hard sell for my grandmother because she was cognitively intact. But what we had to do and what we had to say is, Grandma, this is what everybody in the family is willing to do. We are not going to be able to have someone sleep here every single night. This is not an option anymore. We've done it for months and months and months, and you seem like you're going to probably want that going forward. Wouldn't you be more comfortable somewhere? You can live in a private apartment. You'll have access to somebody, and we can visit you. We can go out to lunch. We can do things together. We can get our relationship back. We can stop functioning as a social worker, a nurse, a nursing assistant, a physical therapist. We want to be your kids. We want to be your grandkids. We don't want to do this anymore. But it usually takes at least one person in the family to put up a wall and say, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. What or who are you stealing time from? If your loved one is monopolizing all of your time or most of your time, are you taking that time away from work, your relationship with your partner or your spouse, your children, or your self-care? And for a lot of you, I know that it's your self-care that you're stealing from. Where are you stealing time from? We all have 24 hours in a day. You can't do this by yourself long-term indefinitely. Is there another person, place that's a better fit for what this person needs? Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan had this, storybook supposed romance that everybody talks about. And she was probably one of the first public caregivers. And she talked a lot about taking care of President Reagan, who had Alzheimer's disease. And she talked very openly with the media about how he will never move out of their Bel Air home. She would never consider moving him. And unfortunately, that I think set for some people sort of a precedent. Well, it's the right way to do it, because she was one of the first people that talked openly about being a caregiver that was a public figure. And I got to tell you, the Reagans had something to keep President Reagan at home that none of us have. Well, I'm pretty sure none of us have. Even if you have tons of money like the Reagans had, that's not what I mean. I'm guessing that if President Reagan was wandering around in his home in Bel Air, that it was probably the Secret Service who stopped him. Do you have that kind of help in your home? Maybe you have a home care aide or two. Maybe you have friends and family and neighbors helping out. Great. But President Reagan had doctors and nurses and nursing assistants and probably the Secret Service. And for many, many, many of us, that is just not a reality. Somebody just wrote in, broke up with 2 girlfriends because of mom's care. I'd love to hear more about that. What was the complaint of the girlfriends? I'd really like to hear that. What did they say specifically? I'm curious because I bet this will lead us to a little bit more of a conversation about boundaries. Acknowledge what is no longer working for you and your family. What is no longer working? So I once worked with a family, and there was one woman, I'm going to call her Sue. And Sue was taking care of dad at home. Dad had all kinds of health issues. She'd been doing it for maybe about a year. And she wanted me to sit down with her 3 siblings because she was burnt out. She was dealing with compassion fatigue. She wanted more help from her siblings. And her siblings sat down and said, listen, we really think senior living is the best option for dad. We don't think you should be doing all this. And Sue wouldn't hear it. Sue says, no, here's what we're going to do. I am burned out. I'm exhausted. You guys aren't really doing anything. Now, that wasn't true. They were bringing meals. They were taking him to the doctor. They were helping. They would come over and visit, but they didn't want dad living with them because they knew they didn't have the bandwidth. And Sue said to her 3 siblings, here's what I propose. I want everybody to take 1 weekend a month and we'll switch, and you'll come stay at my house so I have a weekend off every month. And the siblings said, no, that's not working for us. She made herself a martyr because she wanted to say to herself, well, these siblings, they're so lousy. They're like, we'll pitch in, we'll all pay for the senior living. If make up whatever dad doesn't have. But we just don't have the bandwidth to take whole weekends every month to take care of him indefinitely. Again, I wonder if those siblings would have a different attitude if they knew it was like my grandmother's situation for 4 weeks when she broke her shoulders. The person who's writing in about the girlfriends breaking up because of mom's care, I would get moody because the stress of mom's behavior and care. If that's not a wake-up call, now if these 2 women were good people and that you thought were potential partners that you wanted to be with, and your moodiness about mom's care and behaviors got in the way, isn't that a great catalyst to make some kind of change, to start setting some boundaries, to start thinking about what's no longer working for you and your family? If you're not able to have a romantic life because of the care of your mom, something needs to change. And I'm so sorry, I'm going to pronounce your name wrong, so I'm not even going to try. But I mean it. I want you to think about that. You're the only one that can change it. If you want to have a successful romantic relationship, what can you do to change your caregiving attitude? What can you do to change your care? Now, maybe the time to course correct. Some people, they need a crisis, but somebody like Jen, who's on today, and I'm so happy that you're on, you're early in your caregiving journey, it's time to prevent the crisis. And what can you do? So the boring advice nobody wants to hear, be mindful. This stuff is important, your diet, your exercise, your sleep, your socialization. But talk to your doctor. If you have a good long-term relationship with your doctor and they know you and you talk to them about what's going on, they're going to have suggestions for you. And a lot of times they're going to say, hey, is it time to look for more help? Is it time to look for a little bit of help in the home? Is it time to look at some senior living options? Also, listen, I'm a former shrink. I've been a psychotherapist. I don't do it anymore. I do coaching with family caregivers and I do some business coaching, but I've been a therapist and I've been to therapy. I don't think you ever can be a good therapist without having been to therapy. I believe that therapy, if you get a good therapist, it can really help you. A good therapist is going to call you out and say, look, you're not taking care of yourself. Your nerves are shot. You feel like crap. What can you do differently? What can you change your attitude? Can we look at some exercises so you can relate to your parent in a little bit of a different way? Is it what can you do? Like, how hold you accountable to taking care of yourself and doing some things differently? And a lot of good therapists will help you with resources. They'll be able to say, oh, I know some resources that might be helpful. Another one, and the Covenant team will definitely help you with this if you're interested. The other one is support groups. If you are a family caregiver and you are not in a support group, you're missing out. And right now, it's easier than ever to join a free family support group. And again, I know the teams at Covenant, it can certainly hook you up with that. And in the evaluation, Petra, if you would put the evaluation up, that would be super. In the evaluation, if you want to put in there, if you would like someone from Covenant to share some support group information in your geographic area, please do that. But that when you probably have friends, and the person who said the girlfriends broke up with you because of your stress, when you go to a caregiver support group, a good caregiver support group, they're going to give you tough love, but they're also going to say, yeah, I've done some of that. I'm guessing that your girlfriends have never been in a caregiving situation. So you're going to get some of that emotional support that you really need that in a caregiver support group. It's easier, again, like I said, it's easier than ever before. There are lots of in-person ones, but one of the silver linings to the crazy last couple of years is there's so much more virtual help. Psychotherapy, there's no way that you can't get a virtual psychotherapist now. There's so many options, but support groups are huge and they can help you. I know so many of you deal with guilt and feel guilty about, thinking about taking care of yourself or thinking about changing how much you do for your parent. But a good therapist, a good support group will help you to manage it. It needs to be managed. If you feel guilty, that doesn't mean you're guilty of something. If you're starving your parent or they live with you and you're not giving them medicine, okay, feel guilty about that. But feeling guilty because you want to play golf once a week, or you want to spend time with your spouse, feeling guilty because you want to see your kid in their ballet recital, that's nonsense. There's no way you should ever feel guilty about it. And if you do, you need to go to a support group, a therapist, or talk to your doctor about that. A lot of the stuff that we've talked about, going to a support group, going to talk to your physician, touring a Covenant living community, all of that, oh, Jen, yeah, what happens if the patient resents the caregiver self-care? That's another one. You can reach out to me if you want individually. I'm glad if you write on your chat for your evaluation, if you want me to reach out to you directly, I will, and we can maybe set something up. I'll do like a 5-minute consultation for free if you're interested, or you could talk to somebody at Covenant. But I will tell you that too bad if the patient resents your self-care. I'm serious. I'm really about the tough love right now. Too bad. You're giving them what you can, but you need to give to yourself too. So all of the strategies we talked about, setting boundaries and doing self-care, seeing a therapist, going to a support group. Dr. David Burns is one of my favorite authors. He's a psychiatrist and he wrote several great books, but one is called Feeling Good, and it's a little bit of an older book, but it's about depression. And Dr. Burns talks about the concept of action begets motivation, begets more action. Depressed people, when someone's depressed, they don't, and you say, a doctor says, hey, go for a walk, 5 minutes, take 5 minutes and just take one small step, or call a friend when you're feeling down, take 5 minutes and call a friend. And people say, I just am not motivated. I can't do it. I don't want to do it. I don't feel like it. Well, Dr. Burns says, just take a small action. And when you take one small action, it begets motivation, which begets more action. And Dr. Burns was talking about depression, but I believe this relates very much to taking care of yourself and getting beyond burnout, getting beyond stress, getting beyond compassion fatigue. Do one small thing this weekend. Decide on one thing you're going to do, whether you're going to call your doctor, whether you're going to make an appointment with Covenant Living, whether you're going to set one boundary with your loved one, whether you're going to ignore that your loved one resents you doing some self-care. Make one small step that's going to reduce your stress. Your stress level for tomorrow is completely up to you. Your stress level for today, You gave me the numbers. Some of you are in good shape, but a lot of you have very high numbers. If you're at a 90, what can we do to get you to an 80 by the end of this weekend or by Monday? On that piece of paper, on that pencil, I want you to take a moment and I want you to write down the one thing you're going to do. Are you going to look for a therapist? Are you going to call your doctor? Are you going to find a support group? Are you going to seek out a tour with Covenant Living? Are you going to set a boundary with your loved one? Are you going to say, I'm going to do 1 hour a week or 10 minutes a night for myself? I want you to write down that one thing that you're going to do. You're the only one that can change it. The circumstances, having to care for somebody that you love, by the way, it's not mandatory. There's a lot of people out there that have loved ones who need care who do nothing. And you probably know them. There's some of your siblings, there's some of your family members that do nothing. But you have stepped up to the plate. And if you're stressed and you have compassion fatigue and you're burned out, it can get better, but you have to make the decision. So write down that one item that you're going to do that's going to reduce your stress level. And I want to thank Covenant Living so much for putting this program on today and sponsoring. If you found this useful, you can certainly ask Covenant Living to send you a copy of the recording if you want to share it with other people in your friend family network who are caregiving. And Petra, if you would put in the chat section, the Covenant Living, covliving.org/locations, so folks can look for their local Covenant Living if they'd like. And if you also, Petra, would please put in the link for the evaluation. We would love any feedback that you have about today's program. I'm thinking of you. Thank you for all you do for your loved one. There's a lot of people that opt out of caregiving, and you're not doing that. You deserve to take care of yourself. Have a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That really was so interesting and helpful, even for me. Everyone, thank you for attending today's program. We'd like to thank Covenant Living for sponsoring today's program for you. I just put the link back in the chat section. Please fill out the evaluation if you'd like to. It would help us make our program even better. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.